A very good afternoon to everyone with us today. My name is Ghada Othman. I'm the head of programs here at Pearl Initiative. It's my pleasure to welcome to you our virtual panel on discussing the significance of corporate governance to tech startups and SMEs in the Gulf region. Before we begin, I'd like to start by first introducing the Pearl Initiative. The Pearl Initiative is the Gulf region's leading independent non-profit organisation working to improve corporate accountability and transparency across the private sector, family firms, MSMEs, and philanthropic non-profit organisations in the Gulf region. We were established 10 years ago by regional business leaders and the UN Office for Partnerships. More recently, we are one of the few organisations in the Gulf region to receive special consultative status from the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Now, the Pearl Initiative runs programs focusing on governance-related matters, conducts regionally based research, convenes business leaders, governance, civil society leaders, students to discuss challenges and opportunities in implementing best practices in the workforce. We also run workshops, trainings, and we implement best practices across the workforce. We support business professionals as they take the lead in implementing corporate governance, accountability and transparency and practices into their organisations. Now, through our Governance in Tech programme, we are collaborating with Let's Work, a tech startup established in the Gulf region in 2019. It provides its members with flexible and affordable solutions for workspaces. Now, Let's Work membership gives you access to some of the city's finest cafes, hotels, co-working spaces with access to unlimited benefits and community perks. Alternative, you can also find and rent on-demand spaces such as meeting rooms, private offices, podcasts, photo studios, recording studios, and pop-up spaces, depending on your needs. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you our moderator for today's session, Dylan Coutinho. Dylan started his career as an environmental analyst for US government, working closely on regulatory procedures for infrastructure management within the state of Massachusetts. Since moving back to the UAE, he has worked with different consulting organizations to understand the Gulf market, while also conducting market research for businesses and looking to localize their operations in the region. In his current role as corporate governance lead, Dylan conducts projects as part of Pearl Initiative's governance in MSME, anti-corruption, governance in tech programs, focusing on enhancing competitiveness of small businesses and the community through implementation of robust governance frameworks. Dylan has his bachelor degree in environmental science and resource economics, as well as a master's in public policy from the University of Massachusetts. Now, thank you for moderating today's session, Dylan. I'll hand it over to you to lead our session and introduce our panel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ghada. And thank you all for joining us today. We've got an exciting conversation because we'll be talking about governance and its significance to the startup community, particularly for startups in their early stages of growth. Before we begin, I'm actually going to take a step back and perhaps let our panelists introduce themselves. We've got a great lineup today with experience spanning across the Gulf region and beyond. Deborah, can I go to you first and then Frank?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm Deborah Webster. I created something called Amani. Amani is a holistic approach to ESG, and it's based on, we look at three fundamental pillars, and that's responsible leadership, ethical use of data and technology, and impact and sustainability. And to be honest, so we started mapping this kind of the role of business in the world and its impact in the world over 10 years ago. Developed it actually because I used to be a partner with a global executive search firm in the region. And it was my client that said, there is something unique to what I'm doing. They challenged me to develop this model. It's intercultural, multi-generational. We've mapped family businesses, high net worth families, communities living on less than $2 a day. And I work a lot with startups using the model. And it's a bit of a kooky way of looking at things, but it's with we optimize results, but also we have this red flag system that, for instance, identified Theranos, the blood testing company in Silicon Valley, as a no-go 18 months before the scandal. So some people have described it as identifying the murmur before the heart attack. So and we come at governance from having good people making good business, having decent backbone, and the courage to make the right decisions. That's a quick blah, blah, blah. Hope it helps. Glad to be here.
All right, thanks, Deborah. So this is Prem Anand. I'm the head of business solutions and a regional manager for Middle East and Africa for a technology company called Zoho. So to give a 1-minute brief about Zoho, we are a technology company. We are into the industry for 25 years, more than 25 years. And we have built more than 50 plus business applications, which can be used across all the verticals: sales, marketing, HR, finance, operations, basically you name it, we have it, kind of a thing. That's it about us. And we are into the industry in Middle East and Africa. We have more than 12 offices and we are expanding.
Amazing. Well, thank you both, and thank you so much for joining us today. I think I'm just going to quickly set some context for the session before we actually jump into the discussion itself. We know the massive toll that COVID-19 pandemic has taken on both the physical and mental health of a lot of people. And while its effects are slowly starting to subside, its adverse impacts of the business community still continue to linger. Research on governance in the Gulf is very limited, and organizations are still very reluctant to share information on this publicly. And these concerns are also further amplified as SMEs and startups tend to deprioritize the implementation of good governance in an attempt to keep their businesses profitable. Furthermore, the impact of COVID-19 has sort of dissuaded entrepreneurs from starting new and innovative businesses. Global research has also shown that organizations with good corporate governance policies and frameworks demonstrate increased stability and trustworthiness and are deemed more bankable by investors. In today's session, we will discuss both the functional and structural components that startups can adopt, while also understanding the current and future trends for the sector in the Gulf region. With that, let me turn to you, Prem, for our first question, seeing that you work in a tech organization yourself. What does corporate governance for tech startups look like? And is it different from regular startups or small businesses in the region?
Right, thanks, Dylan. I would say corporate governance is actually a very old term or a very old culture or tradition, wherein I think we have just put a flashy name to it right now and we are using it. If you think about it, when let's trace back or step back a decade ago or 2 decades ago, when our grandfathers used to run a company, all that was like a village. You go to a person and then they talk to it, and then you go to the next person, they talk something, and it forms like a big organization. But right now, I think when there is a difference between a small business and startup versus the tech startup, I think it's a bit easy for people to accommodate to it. And especially when you talk about a tech startup, they actually know what they're doing, because if I am the CEO or CIO or CSO, then I can make a strategic decision on my own. I don't want to depend on some people to do some governance. And I think everybody does everything. That is a problem and a good thing. And especially in a startup, let's say if I'm the developer, I'm the finance guy, I'm the owner. And adoption of corporate governance is easy when you know who you serve to, and that is vice versa.
Deborah, maybe if I can turn to you to share your thoughts on this.
So I see it a little bit differently. So I'll give you some examples. So for instance, I would be asking, so one of the fundamental purposes behind corporate governance, because I know a lot of startups kind of like, it's not for me, it seems cumbersome. And so I want to make it a bit more real and a bit more pragmatic in order to help founders understand why it's actually a friend and not a foe. So I was speaking to a blockchain founder, and I was asking him, it's like, so what protocol are you using? He's like, well, I don't know. My tech guy knows that. So that's as the CEO of a company, it is your responsibility to understand the reason behind why all the decisions were made, like the logical process. So governance is actually just being its explainability of your company, explainability of your decisions, and how they increase the likelihood of your success is how I would see it. In that very simple term. Is that, and for a tech company, I think it's more complex, because there's the governance and the management of data. And there's the ethical and responsible use of technology. And so for me, there's this very simple rule of just because you can doesn't mean you should. You need to consider the consequences of your actions. And then the other issue about governance and regulation is playing catch up. And so if a company is well run and they're being responsible, they should actually preempt regulation. They should think of what the landscape should look like, the likelihood of what it will look like, and design the company and the tech and how you're managing it from that perspective. So not reactive, being proactive. I can go into examples if you wish. I'll
absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. I think you've set good context for the actual conversation that we're going to have, and we're actually going to cycle back to how regulation plays a huge role to startups in the region as well. Before we continue our discussion, we would like our audience to answer a quick poll question. It's essentially for us to gauge what the organizational demographic of our attendees look like. So if you please launch the poll. There we go. So what type of organization do you work for or represent? And you can pick and choose which ones attribute to yourselves. While our audience answers the poll, if I can turn to you, Deborah, to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think are the greatest challenges faced by tech startups in our current economic environment? You know, are these challenges similar to what international tech startups face in more developed countries?
Wow. How long do we have? Gosh, you know, I think one of the biggest threats, one of the biggest problems is noise. There's so much noise out there about this company raised this, and you know, AI in this, and blockchain in this, and being able to have stakeholder base that has the depth to ask questions. I think we're overrun by, you know, this company raised this and everyone else wants to jump on. So it's not that we have dumb money or smart money. I think we have lazy money sometimes. And then the other thing that concerns me is people are afraid of asking what may look like a simple question for fear of looking stupid. In my experience and in the model, it's actually some of the biggest kind of red flags are actually come up from asking the really obvious question because no one else asks it, and being able to read the founders. I'm also concerned about the blag and this unconscious bias people have towards extroverts and loud founders. Where oftentimes it's actually the quieter ones that when you ask them the questions, they really understand kind of the nuances of the market and why it matters, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's I like connecting the dots, and that's another thing I think that's missing in the region, is that we haven't actually yet connected all the dots properly, and I think we're missing a massive opportunity to unlock value there.
Absolutely. Prem, would you like to take a stab at this too, given that, you know, Zoho is headquartered in the US? Are there any sort of international standards that are adopted and practiced within the Gulf?
Yeah, I would say especially the challenges in partly this part of the world, or even in the international standards, is failure of delivery. So and I echo Deborah. She told there is a noise. That noise is really frightening. I have to compete. Let's say if I want to work with you, then I have to compete against you. Yeah, if you are in the same industry, and I cannot overpromise and underdeliver something which is happening across the world. I might be eating a sandwich in USA, but I have to eat shawarma over here. Yeah, so I cannot use the same strategy across multiple regions. So in our company, we call it as a transnational localism, wherein we hire local people to serve the local market. And if you think about it, actually tech startups do that. Even unknowingly, they do that. even to, it might be because of lack of resources. The resources, I mean, it might be because of office space or HR or investment or whatever it is. Yeah. But they unknowingly, they do that. They go to let's say they go to a small village around that town. Instead of opening an office in Dubai, I go and open office outskirts of Dubai so I can save some money about around something about it. Yeah. And as Deborah mentioned, the noise is really frightening. We to compete with the noise, we have to have some of the challenges let go by doing those things around it.
No, I think you made some very good points, and there's a lot of talk about, you know, stewardship and setting of a good company culture, especially for like startups, which is something I'll cycle back to further down in our conversation as well. Just quickly moving on, tech startups are sort of viewed as organizations that have the potential to mushroom very quickly. You know, as I mentioned earlier, in an attempt to achieve short-term profitability and growth, startups and SMEs tend to deprioritize the implementation of good corporate governance mechanisms. Deborah, again, if I might turn to you, in your opinion, how much time, efforts, and money should startups invest in order to embed an effective governance framework while also targeting profitability and business growth? And I'll load this with, is it also worth it? Is it also worth the investment for early stage startups?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't think it actually needs to be costly. So we kind of go back to the noise and to the ego piece. If you actually surround yourself by people who will challenge your thinking and keep your feet on the ground, instead of this madness we have of, you know, measuring a company's success in terms of how much money they raised and what the valuation is. I think the ecosystem must change the narrative, and we need to understand, we need to be focused on creating value for the region and beyond the region if we really want to have meaningful tech companies. And we also need to, you know, I mean, for me, part of governance is making sure that you're solving a problem worth solving. You know, it's, you know, we don't need another app to help us buy more stuff that creates to hyper consumerism and all the environmental challenges that has. Like, it's, you know, we look at the SDGs and you're tackling some of those in a responsible way. That's governance 101, to be honest. It starts with a brilliant idea from a great founder and his or her team that wants to execute brilliantly with no shortcuts. Yes, you've got to be creative in order to solve problems in a cost-effective way. But I think we need to level up our thinking. We need to challenge ourselves to bite off bigger challenges.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very well put, and that very, very closely transitions to what I was going to ask next in terms of what are some of the key components, policies and procedures that can be very easily adopted and implemented by startups that are often overlooked in their early stages. You know, quick wins in that way.
Okay, me or Prem?
Well, maybe you can take this, and then I'll let Prem take a stab at it after you.
So over the last year, a lot of the noise has been around purpose. Now, purpose matters. Purpose needs to be substantiated with good principles, and good principles are beyond values. Principles are your guardrails on how you make decisions. And there is a methodology to, you create scenarios of the future. Okay, so what would you do in this scenario? Just because it enables everyone to get in sync in a decision, in the way that we make decisions. And then there's aligning performance with that. So what are you measuring as success? Making sure that's in alignment with your principles and your purpose, and making sure that your practices are actually a fair reflection and with what you espouse. So there's a lot of companies, for instance, that say one thing, but then they do something else in practice. What's standard greenwashing. And then having people that are aligned, people that believe in it, that have got the competence, the character, and the commitment. And when I say character, I don't mean personality, I mean the backbone to make the tough decisions and manage upwards, to have the courage to challenge the people around you and not have fear of losing your job or not getting a bonus or what have you. I see a lot of kind of covering people's, and coasting. Coasting, I think, is terrible. We need to remove that.
Great. Do you want to share your thoughts on this?
Sure. And I think one of the key principles of corporate governance, which at least we can talk about as culture, or it depends on who we work for, yeah, and also who is my employer, what is his interest. If I'm an employee, should I bend to his interest, or should I make my own interest? Should I make my own or opinion, which I can make in the company? And also the hierarchy which we have, the end goal has to be the same. If I'm an employee and an employer, yeah, as an employer, he has to have a goal wherein that employee has to bend with the goal or go along with the goal. And that cannot go with a hierarchy system. It has to be a flat hierarchy, wherein I have to just walk into his room and talk about, okay, this is my idea, and can I go about it? I shouldn't be in a position wherein I have to set an appointment with my CEO to talk about tomorrow's office opening, yeah, in a startup environment. I have to just walk in, or I have to just have the right tools to use, wherein I can chat with them at 11 p.m. To make sure that everything for tomorrow is going good. So the culture has to come from the within. We cannot incorporate or we cannot put a rule to the culture. It has to come from the within.
If I could add something to that, it's funny because good people go into companies, but sometimes the companies actually corrupt their practices. They corrupt the goodness of humans because of decisions they make them make. And I think a lot about the future and what the future should look like, will look like. And if you think about it, companies today act like they own people. But it's actually, that makes no sense, right? It's a symbiotic relationship, and we've forgotten that. And I believe that companies that will thrive in the future will be platforms that enable people to fulfill their aspirations and grow and add greater value. If you think about it, you as an individual, you want to align where you want to add value, that the company's adding value in that way. That's like recruiting 101 and finding a meaningful role 101, right? So it's, I think a lot of these things are overlooked for the sparkliness of tech, but at the end of the day, the tech is only as good as the brilliance and the genius and the goodness of the people that are designing it, building it, and bringing it to market and using it.
No, those are absolutely fantastic points. In fact, I was going to follow up with a question on how important is setting a sort of robust, vibrant company culture within startups, like given the fast-paced nature of the business. Yeah.
Well, Prem started with that, so I'll let him go.
Yeah, I mean, today morning I was in a meeting wherein I was just talking about it, and I think there is a small or thin line between a vibrant culture versus where we work, versus where or what kind of company we work for. Yeah, so we have to give the room to think about it to the employees. So if you just make Prem as a person, let's say I'm a CIO, then my only responsibility is to buy softwares to the company. Yeah, but I also have to make a decision on the internal collaboration. You cannot confine me to a role or a culture, which I want to think like, okay, this company is a tech company, then I have to be very hippie. Then I have to have Starbucks every day. Yeah, we cannot confine a vibrant culture to be like that. You sell perfumes, your culture would be different. Your company's culture has to be different. Yeah, you can call it yourself as a tech startup. Yeah, and even let's say you think about Kareem. Would you call Kareem a tech startup or a transportation company? So because it is heavily backed up by a technology. Without technology, they cannot operate. So so would you expect a similar kind of culture from Kareem and also with Amazon? It's totally different. They can call it vibrant about themselves, but it really depends on whether the employees take that to be a vibrant culture.
I developed something called personal governance, because everyone talks about corporate governance and family governance, but we're only as good as our weakest link. And it's really interesting so I analyze a lot of companies on behalf of investors, especially when it comes to the founders and the teams. And there's a difference between a founder and a CEO. And there's a difference between a CEO of a company that's grand total people of 3 versus a company that's, in the hundreds. And so one of the things founders and investors who are listening to this is look at the scalability of the individual, not where they are today, but if they have the ability to grow. I remember there was this one founder once, and this is another thing. When we're asking questions, we need to remember that founders are really desperate to raise money because this is the game we've set up, right? And so sometimes they answer questions not because they're based on truth, but that's because that's what the investor wants to hear in order to sign the check. But this is a really, really bad setup to a long-term arrangement. I always look at investing in a company as a marriage instead of a one-night stand. And we need to create a safe environment for founders to tell us what's really freaking them out, and that for us to roll up our sleeves and help them solve the problem, not to criticize them, but to see if we can actually help them. We're best placed to help them. Because when we're investing, we're not just investing money, especially if it's smart money, right? We're investing our networks, our customer base, for instance, if we're a family business and we're looking to transition, or we're looking to expand our portfolio. But there was this founder, and I asked him this question. It's like, I'm just curious, but what part of the role do you really, really love? Like when you grow, what would you, if you could spend your time doing anything, what would it be? And he looked at me and he looked at the investors, and they're like, you're cool, like just answer our question. And he's like, I actually just love developing the product. He wasn't like, he was playing the CEO role because that's the stage it was. So if we could create that safety to enable them to be transparent with us, wow, we'd really see some changes.
No, absolutely agree. And also allows for a little more diversification as well, within the company, within the executive management of the company as well.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps if you could share the results of the first poll, please, and you could see how diversified our audience is today. There we go. So good to see that a lot of them are actually startups and small businesses that have joined the call. So this will be very relevant for you. I hope you walk away with some very actionable tips from the conversation. This is a good opportunity for us to transition to our next theme. So we've talked about the sort of functional components of corporate governance that can help a business achieve resilience and growth, and potentially even shield their businesses against any future economic crises. Let's talk a little bit about the structural components of corporate governance for startups. And this fits well given the previous conversation we were just having. If I can direct this to you, Prem, like many small businesses in the region, is it critical for tech startups to establish a board structure or have a sort of board charter in place? And maybe if you can tell us why.
I think we can remove the tech and the startup. Yeah, wherever we talk board, I think it's complicated. Even if it is a three employee company to a 300 employee company, setting up a board is, I think it's I would not say complicated. I think it's a bit tricky. You have to see who you really deal with. Let's say if I am, as Deborah just mentioned, if I'm so passionate about making a product, if I'm so passionate about developing something, would I fit into CEO or CIO? That question has to come from within the top people. Or let's say if I'm supposed to be a CEO, should I make a good decision on marketing, or should I make a good decision, or should I be a good salesy person? Because end of the day, we have to achieve the revenue goals, what we are supposed to achieve. Even with or without the investors, we have to achieve that. So I think setting up a board is a bit tricky, and that has to really come from the within. And this has to correlate with the culture, which we were just discussing about. So once you have a flat culture, and once you know what you're doing and who your audiences are, then if I want to become, or if I want to take up the position to be a CIO, then I would just go and tell that, no, I think CEO doesn't work for me. I would rather be a technologist, and I would become a technical director, not CIO even. So I think even in any of the startups forming up a board, if we have everyone together, and if everyone have the clear goals or roles mentioned in their portfolio, I think it's easy to start up with. What do you think, Deborah? Because I think you come from a incubator. You incubate people, or you help people in that space.
No, I'm an optimizer of humans, right? So I even work with investors to help them create values-based investment thesis and to challenge their thinking of what they're putting their money in, to understand the consequences of what they're putting their money in. So I'm like the jousting partner to founders and investors. So what's the purpose of a board? The purpose is to hold the CEO and the company to account, right? Make sure that what there is, it's a level of oversight. So to have someone around you, it could be just a trusted advisor who has the objectivity, who can help you get out of your day-to-day operations. And it gives you actually some breathing space to think about, all right, what are we doing? And make sure that you stay on track. One of the most heartbreaking things I've seen is people work super, super hard. They achieve what they set out to, and then they've got this empty feeling, or they feel pressurized about something. And then in hindsight, they made a wrong decision somewhere. So most important thing is to take a beat and just evaluate, have a time to reflect on the decisions that you're making. I mean, governance is really all about sound decision-making to increase the chances of success and ensuring that the promises that you make are delivered upon. That's it. It's not complicated. That's your touchstone, right?
Fully agree. And also very interesting, which brings me to ask you, who is then responsible for sort of implementing this governance playbook? Should it be the actual startups, or like the executive committee within startups, or should it be like the investors or the funders, or what about early stage startups that are backed by accelerators and incubators? Who takes up that role of establishing governance, or should it be hand in hand?
So in my view, and what I have seen work, because it's one thing to have theory and it's another thing to see it in practice. Once investors come in, I mean, it's obvious, it's got to be a discussion and agreement between the investors and the founders and the leadership team of it depends on how you've structured your company. But always maintaining logic. And logic I have found to be, and common sense are not very common these days. So it's when the investors come in, that's more straightforward. If you are very early stage and you're in an accelerator, I mean, you can have I've seen C3, for instance, do really good board simulation sessions, so the founding teams don't have boards, but they create these simulation sessions so that they experience what the questions of board, what that would look like. If being able to upskill the leadership team, like the core founding team, to understand what the responsibilities of a board are, and to play different, we can take it in different turns of being chair. There's a lot of creative ways of doing it. I don't think in the early stage you've got to be super prescriptive, but just making sure that you do have your checks and balances, and someone is has the role of challenging you.
Very interesting. Prem?
Sure. I think we can, I mean, in my opinion, I would say startup and investors, startup versus, or I would say and not versus. It's a two-dimensional and three-dimensional view, how I would see. I think a startup, if I put all my effort into starting a company, then I would say X investment and Y customer and Z results. Yeah, X, Y, Z. But if I'm an investor, I would just put, okay, how much I put and how much I get. It is just X and Z. I don't care about who you serve to. I just put 100,000 dirhams, then I want 120 in a month. So it's a three-dimensional and two-dimensional view how I look at it. And also, I think when Deborah mentioned previously, it's about the initial stages of how, I mean, the values we bring into the company. It's not about only about the money. You earn 100,000 this month. That doesn't mean that you are a very good company, but you just have 1/3 of that amount, and you have a good customer experience, or you bring in that brings so much value to the table, and I think that stays long term. Nowadays, long term is one of the things which I think no one is going to think about it. Wherein startup versus or startup and investor, they have to think about the long term perspective, wherein customers plays one of the very key role in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's worth bringing up, going back to your points about investors, Deborah, as well, that investors are becoming more socially responsible in their selection process for all their investment decisions. Do you think, and I'll leave this question open to both of you, do you think we are at a stage in the Gulf region where ESG frameworks, which include both diversity and sustainability mandates, need to be at the center of business operations for startups? Or is this something that can wait until they grow a little bit?
Well, I developed a holistic approach to ESG. So look, logically, ESG, maybe the audience isn't fully aware of ESG, but I'll explain why it matters. We are measuring, if for instance, everyone's obsessed by electric cars. And everyone thinks they're amazing, and because there's no emissions. But what they're failing to factor in is the environmental impact from the production of the batteries and the disposal of the batteries. So from my perspective, ESG is just it's an extra lens beyond the financials as to what you should be looking at. And honestly, from my experience of working with companies in the region, the ones that they haven't said they do ESG, but they've built it into their blueprint, and so there was one bank, for instance, I did a lot of work with. They don't say they do ESG, but their way of operating is to uplift the region, et cetera, et cetera. They were not impacted by the financial crisis. They have a phenomenal track record in being able to attract and retain some of the most brilliant people I have ever had the privilege of meeting. So ESG is not a goody two shoes. It's a very sound strategy if it's done properly. Mm-hmm. Anything we do which is not done properly is, first of all, I find it intellectual dishonest. People are not stupid, and we're having a negative impact. We need to, I don't have kids, but we need to think about, our humanity and the role we play. And I won't go into intergalactic kind of governance at this point, because it's
it's a large topic in itself.
I mean, it's not, we don't factor, it's taking responsibility for our externalities, right? And it's being able to look at the total reach. Like, people say, okay, well, this piece of tech democratizes this. Are you really? Okay, what's the downside? So I think we get hooked to our own Kool-Aid, and we need to have someone just kind of slap us down a bit and say, okay, well, how could you do better? Where are you having negative impact? Because then you can actually partner with people who are tackling that piece. And so we're making sure that we're not leaving garbage somewhere and someone else has got to pick it up, be it governments or someone else. Yeah. It's about being a responsible, decent human being.
Yeah.
Science, right?
Right. Prem, would you like to share some thoughts on that?
Sure. I think most of it Deborah covered, but one thing which I would like to add to what she told is she rightly picked up the point. It depends on the work we do. If we give our fullest into it, it depends on whether we get the results or not. We have to work towards it, and especially when we have to touch upon the points with customers and let's say vendors or suppliers, then we would never know how the diversity is between those two people. We act as the center part between those two in people, and especially when it comes to the mandates and which we have to be at the middle ground of all these business people, then yeah, we just have to stick to the values and we have to do what we're doing.
Absolutely. I'd like to quickly take a moment to request our audience to please send in any questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. Panelists, I'm sure, would be very happy to address them as the conversation goes on. I already see one. Natalie, thank you. I'll address your question in a minute, Natalie, towards the end of the session. I'm also keeping track of time, and I'm aware that this is a 1-hour session. So maybe I'll direct this and I'll leave this question open to both panelists to sort of close. We know that the Gulf, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are transforming into a global technology hub or hubs, further encouraging tech entrepreneurs to sort of establish their businesses here. Is there increased collaborative scope for tech entrepreneurs to work with government organizations? And how can governments create these sort of provisions or tailor regulations to further aid with this growth? This is tying back to some of the comments you made earlier, Deborah.
Okay, you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll let you take the lead on this. So,
look, collaboration is, when you have aligned partners with a shared vision and the ability to execute, magic happens. Like there's no challenge that we can't figure out. And I'm always of the view that all the solutions, the global challenges exist, but they're sitting in disparate minds, kind of different minds in different parts of the world. And if we could bring them together, so if governments, my concern is that in order to win a government contract, because it gives greater credibility to, for instance, tech company, they could acquiesce, and we cannot. We must have a very, very clear vision of the future and be absolutely committed to what that looks like. We must have an absolute commitment to privacy. We always need to bear in mind the future we're creating for future generations and remove ourselves from this next generation are amazing with technology. Pressing click, like, share is not amazing with technology. The societal impact and the impact on mental health that some of these apps have had, for instance, is unconscionable. So we need to learn these lessons. We need to learn lessons from even other sectors of the past. So for instance, there's huge parallels between cigarette industry and what's happening with some social media platforms. So back to your question of, is there opportunity for collaboration? Absolutely. I would even put family businesses in there. I've got a huge soft spot for family businesses, and I can talk to you about that separately another time if you so wish. But collaboration is key, but it's, I would urge all the founders that are listening to this to please be brave, hold the line, and say no. And do not have the attitude of, if I don't do it, someone else will. There are people around you who will support you, so hold the line.
It's very good advice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Prem, would you like to take a stab at this as well? Talking about.
Sure. I think especially when the tech startups with the government collaboration, recently I think there is no legacy culture, or at least they don't want to damage the pocket. Yeah, and first thing, if they don't want to damage their pocket, then they are looking for some good tech companies that can serve or cater to what they want right now when compared to legacy players. I think when we have stability and when we have a good vision with privacy, as Deborah mentioned, stability, privacy, and scalability, security. If we have all these aligned together as a tech startup, and I think government recent times, as you mentioned, UAE and KSA, they are more aligned towards tech startups. And actually, we are a testimony. We recently tied up with Dubai Economy. It's been a year, and especially when COVID happened, and we would call ourselves a startup, and we did that, and actually we transformed over 1,500 businesses by collaborating with Dubai Economy, and which is like a live testimonial which happened in this part of the world, and the initiative which the UAE government especially took towards doing all these things is really fascinating. Especially in the tech industry.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is there are a lot of opportunities. You just have to spend the time finding them or looking for them.
Yeah, so I think we need to be more coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
I did something, for instance, so as part of an EU initiative, which was a search for entrepreneurs solving global challenges, because the research shows that those that apply versus those that are proactively hunted for, the ones hunted for are actually far superior than those that are applied. So I think if we improved our methodology for building our pipeline, I think we tackle the diversity issue. I think we tackle the quality of startups that we're dealing with, and then we can start to see the synergies between them, because sometimes, there's some of these challenges are really, really, really hard. You need multi-stakeholder base, but you need them to be on the same wavelength, like there's this resonance. So the opportunities are huge. It just requires a strategic mindset to get there, and doesn't necessarily mean it sits with the big advisory firms that people love hiring because it safeguards their reputation, but the ones that know how to connect the dots that are perhaps off the radar.
Absolutely, and also creates a sort of like you said, a pipeline to retain and hire the right people and the right organizations for your contracts.
Yeah. Because that's the other thing, right? Some founders are brilliant, but they're never going to be a CEO. But they're brilliant innovators, so they could actually be like a perfect fit. So we need to be thinking along these lines. Then the opportunities are stratospheric.
Endless. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm very quickly going to also keeping track of time address Natalie's question. Can you provide us, the tech startups, with one core piece of advice to follow, something you think would be most useful? I'll leave this open as well. Maybe I'll ask Prem if you could take a stab at this.
Sure. May I make a suggestion? Since there's only 21 participants, maybe unmute Natalie to give us some context, because all founders and all tech companies are different. So to give one piece of advice is some context would help me tremendously, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'm just going to see.
Thank you. Perhaps we should do a leadership session for founders. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Natalie, are you here with us? Are you able to speak? All right, here we go.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Prem and Deborah and Dylan. Thank you very much for giving us such a great session.
Hey, Natalie.
Hello, yes. I just wanted to, honestly, this is a question that I was thinking about. If you can give us one core advice, as a key takeaway from this session, what would it be?
Deborah.
Are you a founder?
No, I work in a tech startup.
Okay, all right.
So it's Case Engine. So it's a tech startup. We have a software, an application, basically, for lawyers. And I'm not going to go into the specificities, but I work closely with the CEO. Yes.
Okay, so 2 pieces of advice. If you are working in a startup, make sure it is the best platform that to utilize your time, talent, and resources. And to the CEOs of startups, make sure that the people that you are hiring are aligned with your vision and that you do not break people. Capture all of them and create an environment of trust and deliver on your promises, because if you don't, if they could be sitting on the next $1 billion idea and they won't share it with you. They could have a tweak that would make all the difference to your platform. And unless you have an equitable approach to them, you will never bring out their best. You are a tech startup, but you are a human company first and foremost. You serve people, and it's people that develop your tech. I hope that helps, Natalie. Prem.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Sorry, Prem.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also you can think about who you're serving to. Let's say you don't over-promise and under-deliver. At the same time, you have to make sure if you want to bite the bullet, sometimes you have to bite the bullet. You cannot let it go. You cannot let the bullet go through your body. So and especially in startups, if you are in a customer-facing role, then I think most probably you have to take that without even questioning your employees. And hiring is one of the main important or most important thing which Deborah touched upon, because as a startup we don't have time to do political stunts in the company. Rather, we focus on improving the customers and making money.
I love the political stunts thing. Oh my gosh. Yes, remove politics, absolutely. Yeah.
Always a detriment to start trying to expand and grow.
Well, they're also a detriment to governments, but
very, very true. Well, Bree, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and Deborah and Natalie as well for your question. You know, I think when Gala switches her camera on, means it's time to end the session. But thank you. Yes, Gala. Thank you to Deborah and Prem for joining us today, and also for the audience for sitting in and sharing your questions with us. Over to you, Gada, to close.
Yeah, absolutely. Sincere thank you to Deborah and Prem for sharing your wonderful insights and experiences. I'm sure our audience can walk away with some actionable tips they can perhaps implement in their own tech startups or their own organizations. And thank you, Dylan, for moderating. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. A fantastic session. And a huge thank you to our audience, all those attended, for sending in your questions, and to the panelists. Thank you for answering. Our collaboration with Let's Work is a 3-part series that will dive deeper into tech governance and its relevance for tech startups in today's business climate. Do be sure to visit our website to register your interest in our next session, and also join in on any other sessions that you may find interesting as part of Pearl Initiative's program delivery. Thank you all once again. And I hope you have a lovely day ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gava. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.